Hi, boys and girls. I'm going to continue reading from Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle. We are on the Not Truthful Cure, and Mrs. Haraway is a little worried that they might not like her at her new club, so that's where we're at now. Of course they will like you, said Mrs. Wintergreen. There are 25 members, and they are all intelligent and have children about the ages of yours. Well, I must finish these asters. I'll see you at Frida Workbaskets tomorrow. In the excitement of being asked to the most exclusive women's club in town, Mrs. Haraway forgot all about the call from Mrs. Mallet, who had told her that Fetlock had roller skated through her cottage tulips and she wanted something done about it. At dinner that night, Fetlock looked pale and was very quiet. Mr. Haraway was worried about the income tax and government waste, and so Mrs. Haraway very wisely did not bother them with her problems, but smiled and thought about her wonderful new club. The luncheon the next day should have been an overwhelming success. The table was decorated with pink tulips, a pink tablecloth, pink candles, pink napkins, and pink dishes. The main course was a maraschino cherry, walnut, marshmallow, pineapple, strawberry, cream cheese, and cabbage molded salad, accompanied by pink biscuits. There were also pink mints and pink gumdrops. And luckiest of all, Mrs. Haraway just happened to be dressed entirely in pink, with even pink gloves and pink roses on her hat. And you can see the roses on her hat right over there. All through lunch, she was so happy, then everyone said, "You look adorable, Helen, dear. I wish I'd worn pink." Mrs. Workbasket was very proud that she had asked her. Then the members of the earnest workers moved into the living room for the business meeting, and that was the end of Mrs. Haraway's happiness. As soon as each lady had found a chair and helped herself to the pink mints and pink gumdrops, Mrs. Feathering stood up and said, "Fellow members of the earnest workers, I do not wish to appear snobbish or unkind, but before voting on our new member, I feel that I must ask a few questions. Mrs. Haraway, is it true that your husband is a burglar who is known all over the world for his clever jewelry robberies?" Mrs. Haraway's face turned scarlet and she swallowed her pink gumdrop whole. She said, "Fanchon Feathering, how dare you say a thing like that about my Warner? You know perfectly well that he is an executive vice president at Rocco Cement." "Well," said Mrs. Feathering, "my information came straight from the lips of Warner's own little boy. Last week he was over playing canasta with Winifred, and he told Vernon and me that his mother and daddy could never go out any place because his daddy was hiding from the London police and the Paris police and the Russian police and the FBI. He also told us that Warner's picture was in every post office in Europe and that he is training Fetlock, I believe that is your son's name, to work with him. He said that so far all his father would allow him to steal were little things like rings and watches, but he thought he would be ready for the big stuff by Christmas." Mrs. Gorman jumped up and said, "But Fetlock told us that his father was a train robber." Mrs. Roberts said, "He told me his father was a confidence man who robbed windows. He warned me never to pay attention to him when he talked about investments." And Mrs. Haraway said, Mrs. Harrison said, "He told Aunt Elsie and me that Mr. Haraway was a cowboy who had hurt his back breaking wild horses. Fetlock said he was a cowboy too until he was kicked in the forehead by a horse. The blow affected his eyesight, which is why he has to wear glasses. Really, Mrs. Haraway, I don't like to interfere, but I do think it is nothing short of cruel to allow such a small child to bulldog horses." But before Fetlock's mother could answer, Mrs. Pinwheel said, But none of that could be true, because only yesterday Fetlock told me all about his lonely childhood and how he had to sell papers and work in a factory to make enough money to buy medicine for you when you were sick, Helen. And while Mr. Haraway was in the penitentiary for making counterfeit money, just kind of like being in jail, Mrs. Gertch, who had 7 children, shrieked, "Counterfeit money? That's not what he told me. He said that his father sold little children. He said that he gathered them up at playfields and he sold them to orphanages." Mrs. Haraway, her face was as white as paper, said, "Not one word of this is true. My husband is a fine, upright, honorable citizen. Fetlock is a dear, sensitive, loyal little boy. I am sorry I ever came to your club. I never did want to be a member anyway." And she began to cry. Mrs. Mallet said, "Before you go, Mrs. Haraway, I wish you would tell me what you intend to do about my tulips." And she turned to the other women. "Yesterday, Fetlock deliberately, which means on purpose, roller skated through my cottage tulips and crushed and injured 17. And obviously his mother doesn't care." Mrs. Haraway said, "I do care. I care terribly about your tulips, Mrs. Mallet, but I was so excited when Mrs. Workbasket called me that I forgot. What would you like me to do? Pay for them?" "Oh, heavens no," said Mrs. Mallet. "I wouldn't dream of anything like that. I didn't intend to make any trouble. I just thought that you should know. I think a normal mother wants to know when her child performs vandalous acts. I know I would. I would want to know anything like that a child of mine, although goodness knows Willie Vert is really too good to live. His old Irish nurse used to say, 'Naturally, I didn't expect you to pay for my tulips. How could you?' They were very, very rare and in full bloom, really priceless. However, if you insist, I might accept some other plants, zinnias perhaps. I noticed on the way over here that you had some fine young plants." "Oh, I have," said Mrs. Haraway. "They are strong and stocky and very healthy. I'll bring them over to you as soon as I get home." "There is no hurry," said Mrs. Mallet, "but I would like to get them set out before dark. Of course, zinnias aren't as pretty as cottage tulips, but I guess I can't be particular, can I?" Mrs. Haraway blew her nose on her pink handkerchief, gathered up her pink gloves and purse, and went into the bedroom for her pink coat. Her happy day was spoiled, and she just wanted to die. Big tears made polka dots down the front of her pink suit and splashed onto her purse. Then Mrs. Workbasket, who had invited her to the Earnest Workers Club in the first place, came into the bedroom. Putting her arm around Mrs. Haraway, she said, "Don't pay any attention to that hateful Crystal Mallet, Helen dear. Her little Willie Vert rode his bicycle all over my azaleas last year, and she not only didn't replace them, but she didn't pay for them. But she wouldn't apologize, and she wouldn't send Willavert to Mrs. Pigwiggle." "Mrs. who?" asked Mrs. Haraway, sniffling. And that's where we're going to stop there, friends, and we'll pick up with Mrs. Pigwiggle later.